Okay, so welcome. This should be the recording for Toon Boom 3. We'll be going into the second aspect of putting together our Pac-Man scene. So you should have already assembled your scene with having your two versions of Pac-Man, closed and open mouth. You should have your maze drawn. You should have, I can turn this off now. You should have your ghost and the vulnerable ghost loaded into your scene. Okay? So, one thing we do need to quickly touch on from the second set of notes is we did not add a color card at the very end, and a color card fills the background with a color. So if you don't put in a background or you don't fill your entire camera, it'll either leave it transparent if you render the video out as one that has transparency, or it'll just fill it with black. So make sure you want to make sure you have a background. So to do that, it's just under the plus sign where you're going to add a layer of a certain type. I'm going to add a color card. Now you'll notice that for whatever reason, it always likes to put whatever layer you have selected in the color card. So I'm just going to click on nothing and add a color card. Boom, adds a color card and it's pure white. You can double click on this layer here to bring up the properties. We'll be talking more about layer properties in a second. But then you can just change this box here, and so I'm gonna do sort of like a lavender and close. Okay, so you have my maze and have all of my stuff. So now we're on today's notes. So what we're going to be doing is adding pegs to a few of these things. Sometimes you'll need to manually add layers to a peg, so you do that by dragging them onto the peg. So let's start with getting our Pac-Man into a peg. So I'm going to click on the Pacu layer. If you just click the Add Layer button, it will automatically add it to its own peg. And so now you can see there's a Pacu peg layer and the Pacu layer, and you can see that it is childed to the peg. My maze doesn't need a peg, it's fine. I can leave this layer off. My ghost, I also want to put this into a peg. And the vulnerable ghost, I don't want to be in its own peg, but I want it to be in the ghost peg. So I want to be moving the vulnerable ghost and the regular version of the ghost at the same time so that I can switch between the two at the same location whenever I want. I can just change the exposure. So I have ghost peg driving vulnerable ghost and ghost. I'm going to put ghost above vulnerable ghost in my peg hierarchy. It doesn't really matter, but just doing it. Okay, so my Pac-Man layout layer, I'm just going to put down here at the bottom just to move it out of the way. It is off. I could turn it on if I need it, but I don't. Oh, and then one other thing I noticed before I get ahead of myself, actually, so I do need this on, is, let me turn off the ghost pegs. I didn't make the gate area here, so give me 1 second to do that on my maze. And we'll go ahead and increase this. Okay, and we just take our eraser. Cool. All good. So Pac-Man's not actually going to start in here, but I just needed to make sure I had that there for the walls, rather. Okay. So let's get into it. Now we have our pegs. The next thing we need to handle is the exposure. So how long do we plan on making our scene before we start animating all of this stuff? Well, I'm asking for 10 seconds of animation. So if at a minimum, you can go longer if you want. So what would that look like? What is 24 frames times 10? 240. So I'm going to just drag my red tab out here to 240 to give me 10 seconds of time to work with here. Now you'll notice none of my layers last 240 frames. So I need to start extending my exposure. So let me extend the exposure for my vulnerable ghost here. Extend exposure. Let me extend exposure for my regular version of the ghost. Let me zoom out here. Let me extend exposure. Oh, and I have these layers off, so that doesn't help. There we go. Let me extend exposure for my maze. You don't need to extend exposure for pegs. Pegs do not have exposure. And then for my PacMan. Now here's the thing for my PacMan. I do not want to just simply have the mouth open for 240 frames. Because remember, I have this frame where the mouth is closed and this frame where the mouth is open. So I want those to be switching off at regular intervals. So just for sake of ease, I decided upon a half-second interval for mouth open and mouth closed. Obviously starting with the mouth closed. So if that were the case, if we're doing a half a second, and a second is 24 frames, that means that I need it to show for 12 frames. So I'll move this to frame 13, and I'm going to extend my exposure to here, and then go to frame 24, and extend my exposure here. So now I got 1 second of half closed, half open. Then I'm just going to select these 24 frames, copy, paste, paste. And so now I got 72 frames. And then I can grab those 72 and paste those. Boom, boom. And then it'll go a little off, but that's fine. It'll cut it off. Boom. So now we have our 240 frames, but of PacMan's mouth opening and closing at a regular interval. And I can turn off my PacMan layer, or layout, rather. Okay, so we have our exposure is extended to 240 frames. Our PacMan has the correct exposure where the mouth opens and closes over the course of those 240 frames. Now we just need to actually start preparing to animate. So for starters, let's go back to the notes and talk about animation tools here in Toon Boom. So the golden guy we will talk about in a second is when you are animating. Okay? So there are these 4 tools for affecting change to your layers. The transform tool, which will keyframe all channels. So that's when, say for example in Maya, and you would hit S and keyframe all, it would keyframe your scale, your rotate, and your move, right? Your translate, rather. Well, typically we want to set only keyframes of the type that we want to make, be them translate keyframes, rotate keyframes, or scale keyframes. So these advanced animation tools, as they're called in finger quotes, you need to make them display under Windows, Toolbars, Advanced Animation. And it is very, very important that you're only setting the appropriate keyframes that you mean to be setting. You don't want to be keyframing things like size and rotation when you don't mean to, because you may be trying to affect long periods of change. Like, for example, when you're doing your ball bounce, remember how we had to go back and delete all those extra keyframes that we had so that we could get the smooth roll from the start directly to the finish. So that's what we're trying to account for. So these tools are just like you know them in Maya. Translate tool is just the move tool. Rotate tool is just like the rotate tool. And the scale tool is just like the scale tool. Difference is, they're mostly in 2 dimensions in here. So, whoops, not Maya. So, back to here, I brought up this golden guy. So that's for toggling animation. Now, if you don't have your animation tools up, you need to go to Windows, Toolbars, and Advanced Animation. That will add this toolbar that's right up here that's under my zoom buttons. So that's really useful for right now. You can see there they are. So those are your advanced animation tools. Translate, rotate, scale. So I am going to grab scale for now. And I'm going to go on to my ghost layer. And so this is where we want to talk about the golden guy. The golden guy on the toolbar over here to the left. The golden guy. This is the animator. The golden guy is the animator. If your golden guy is on, then animation is on. It means the animator is on shift. If you see the red dude, animation is off. Animator is off having a coffee break. Okay? The red guy is not the animator. Golden guy is the animator. So I am deliberately turning off animation right now. Why am I doing that? So when you have animation off, movements made with animation tools are persistent changes and not keyframed in time. I want to make these permanently smaller, these ghosts. They're too big. They don't fit in my maze. So I want to permanently scale this down, which is why I have my animate turned off. This isn't a keyframe thing. This is just, it'll always be small now. So I'm going to just go ahead and scale this down. I'm going to hold shift to keep it in proportion. Make it small. I'm going to grab my, hold on. Grab my move tool and just move this off to the side so that I can see it in a hallway. And then I'll just have to finish that up. Let me grab my scale. Hold shift. Okay, so now it fits in there. Now the reason I'm doing it on the ghost layer is this picture is a different size than the vulnerable ghost layer. So if I edited the peg, it would be editing both of them at the same time. Each of these individually needs to be controlled. So I'm also gonna, again, I'm on my vulnerable ghost layer. I'm gonna scale it down while holding shift. Grab my move tool to push these over here. Grab scale again. And then I'll finish it up by moving it so that it's just behind. And it's not going to be perfect, but it just needs to be close. Okay, there we go. So now these are appropriately sized. Now, by contrast, I'm going to go now and fix the size of my PacMan, because my PacMan is a little big. So I could edit both of these drawings individually, but it's actually in my interest, since it's just being, both of these drawings are being controlled by the peg, to just scale this on the peg directly. So just have the peg starting with a less than 1 scale, right? So I'm going to grab scale again, and I'm going to hold shift and scale this down, and also I'm going to move it over here into the hallway. Okay, that looks like it'll fit, so that's good. Alright, so again, we want to have, for what we just did, you turn animate off, grab your scale tool, maybe your move tool to get it into the hallway so that you can see it, and you want to scale it down so that your PacMan and your ghosts can fit through the hallways. Alright, so now we are ready to animate. So let's turn on the golden guy. Golden guy is on, animation is active. We are setting keyframes now. So let's start by setting the very first keyframe. This fellow, my Paku, goes down here. And you can see there's a keyframe there. I'm going to hit F6 to set a keyframe. There's also the plus KF button is add a keyframe. So just what you would think. So we're going to have the PacMan start there. And then the ghost. So you can see the pivot point here is just off in the middle of nowhere. So let me just move the pivot point onto the center of these two. I'm going to move my ghosts up here. I'm not going to have them come out of this. And so then one other thing is, right now both the exposure for ghost and vulnerable ghost are both exposed. So you can see a little bit of the vulnerable ghost back here. So I'm just going to go ahead and honestly get rid of most of the vulnerable ghost exposure. Again, I can add this back when I'm ready. So we can just get rid of that. Now, we've done it. We've set one keyframe on these bad boys on the peg. And again, we always are setting our keyframes only on the pegs. So if you see these little dots, they should only be on a peg layer. Now, the trick of today's assignment will be moving these things in a speed that is consistent throughout. So I'm going to take my ghost and I'm going to worry about getting the ghost going. I'm on my move tool. I'm on the peg. And so I want to move my ghost over here to this corner so that I can get him out of here. So how much time do I think that should take? I don't know. 6 frames? Oh, I'm on the PacMan layer. Whoops. I don't know. So 6 frames, maybe? Now, coming back to the notes here, you're going to want to be able to see where your in-betweens are so that you can tell how well you're pacing this out. So to turn on your motion path, you need to go to View, Show, and Control. And so with your control on, View, Show, and Control, it will show you the path that your thing is following and where the notches are. Here, I'm going to change my color card because it's really difficult for you to see that on there. Okay. So, boom, boom, boom. Alright, so that's 6 frames that it takes to get from here to here. And then, let's see, I don't know. Another 6 to get down here. Now, what you're going to see, though, is when I move this down here, bless you, that it starts arcing this, which is a problem, which we're going to deal with in a second. But you can see here, it's just like in Maya. The graph is trying to make things smoothly transition through things. Just like how at the bottom of our ball bounce, we needed to sharpen those curves because it thought it was trying to, like, you know, smoothly go through the bottom. We're going to fix that manually in a second. Okay, so that's 6 frames to here, 6 frames to here. Honestly, I think it's 4 frames to there. Okay. And there's no, it's really just eyeballing it on this stuff. Okay, so then now our fellow is out here. So I have 5 frames there. And then while the ghosts are in the regular ghost mode, they're trying to go towards PacMan. So it'll be up to you to decide when you're going to have them switch gears. I just ask that you have at least 90 frames of whichever one you're not, like, you need to have at least 90 frames of the ghost being normal before you have it switch into the scared ghost, or you need to have it 90 frames of the scared ghost if you want it to mostly be in the hunting mode. So it doesn't really matter. You just need to have the ghost animated for the entire 240 frames, right? So now, if I want my ghost to come down to here, I don't know, 16, 15, maybe? Oh, and so here's another thing. So before I do that, let me fix where this fellow ends up here, and then that way when I go here and move it down, he's not directly on the wall. And so you just want to make sure the spacing here looks like the spacing here, and it's a little tight. So there we go. So we're at 28. Let's see what another 12 looks like going across here. this is a little too high. And then we do this. And so here I need to increase my exposure here. So I'm gonna plus, 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 plus. Why am I using the plus key? Because that is the keyboard shortcut for add exposure. So I'm just pushing this keyframe back, putting more in-betweens between these two keyframes, slowing down the transition. In fact, okay, so let's see how that looks. So now I'm gonna go ahead and fix these and then I'll play it for you so we can see the speed. Now each of these keyframes have their own, just like in the graph editor they have the tangents, they essentially have tangents, which we're not really gonna mess with tangents in our work in Toon Boom. But they have those essential properties that are individual to each of those keyframes. So what you're going to need to do is, just like we edited in the graph editor in Maya, we will need to go edit some parameters about these keyframes in what Toon Boom calls the path editor. So it's basically the same thing. So how do you get to the path editor? It's boom, boom, boom. Path editor. The little icon for the paths editor looks like this. The graph editor for altering the transition into the selected keyframe and transition to the next key. So what does this layer properties look like? You just need to double click a layer. So in this case, we'll double click our ghost peg, and that pops up the ghost peg layer properties. And then since we're describing its location in space, we're talking about its position. So I want to open up my position path. So you can also look at scale. You could look at rotation if you had these things. So I'm going to open up my scale path editor. And you can see, so here's what looks like the graph editor from Maya. We don't have to mess with it too much though. And you're just going to go 1 point at a time. You don't need to grab the first one, I guess. And you're going to change, this factor here, which is your tension. So what are these three factors that we can edit in here? So there is your continuity, which is the smoothness of a transition. So we can set our continuity to 1, technically, if we wanted. -1, rather. Tension, so how sharp is the path as it goes through a point. So we want an incredibly tense curve because we want it to be moving in a straight line. So we're going to be creating a tension of +1. And then bias is just favoring the animation to one side or the other of the control, or the keyframe rather, in time. Back in our path editor, you're just going to select each of these keyframes, and for each of these keyframes you change its tension to 1, +1, and you'll see that path becomes straight here. Then we'll click on the next one, tension 1, and you'll see that path straighten out. Then we grab the next one, tension 1, lock it in, tension 1, and then tension 1 we would want here for wherever it goes next. Sure. But now you can see, if I go back to start, and so that honestly is even like way too fast, probably. So my animation for this is way off. So we have the tension right now, so these keyframes are set, but I'm gonna grab this, and I don't know, I guess it should take half a second, right? I don't know. This I'll take 10 frames, I guess. And so I'm just spacing out my keyframes now. So I'm spacing out this one from this one so that it takes more time to get to those places. So this should be like here or something. And then this should be here. And then this should be here. Okay, so now let's watch this. Let's run it back. I just retimed it. It's the same path, just that it moves slower. So you can see I have half a second just to get to this corner. You know what I mean? So take it very slow. Like I said, 240 frames is the expectation. So at a certain point, though, your ghost needs to switch gears. So I am going to I wonder what happens if I extend exposure to here. That doesn't do anything. Okay. So I'm going to grab the front frame of this and drag it all the way to here. And that will extend my exposure to here. And then what I'm going to do is everything after this is going to be spooky ghost. So this is a scared ghost. So now you want the ghost to flee. Flee, flee, fools, run, flee for your lives, or whatever he says. Assuming someone knows what I'm talking about. Okay, so here I'm gonna go 12 frames into the future. We'll put that here so you can zoom in. Okay, that looks good. And then I don't know, I guess we go maybe to here. Oh, and so that's not right. What's great is I can just tap my plus sign. Bless you. Okay. And let's see. Probably another 12? 10? I don't know. To get it here. And then I don't know. 16. Get this over here. Okay, so I can see I need a lot more frames in here. Oh, no. Okay, cool. Glad you're here, though. I hadn't marked you yet. And thank you for not saying anything on the video. Much appreciated. Okay, so I'm just adding exposure here. I want the spacing here the spacing between these keyframes should be consistent throughout all of these, as best you can get it. So I'm increasing the exposure. More frames between the keyframes means more in-betweens, takes longer to get there. Okay, let's give that a go. So I'm going to go in again and fix up these new keyframes I've added. So double click my peg layer to bring up the layer properties and just open up the path editor. And then again, we're just trying to sharpen up some of these folks. So this one, we need to sharpen that to 1. This one, sharpen that to 1. Sharpen this. Right? Okay. And so you'll just continue the ghost path. You can have your Pac-Man eat the ghost or not. That's not part of the assignment. So the assignment is just to have these two things moving around on rails. So okay, so then you'll continue and finish up with your ghost. Like I said, you need to have at least 90 frames of either the ghost being... You need to have 90 frames of the ghost being in the regular mode and in the vulnerable mode. However much you use the rest of that time for which side, either vulnerable or not vulnerable, is up to you. But 240 frames, 180 of which have to be one or the other. One and the other, I should say. Okay, so PacMan, same concept. What are we doing with our PacMan? So in, I don't know, 16 frames, I want this fellow to be here. And we're only going to worry about translate right now. We're only worried about translate. So that's why I'm using my move tool. I'm not using the transform tool. And so set a keyframe. And again, I'm going to need to turn on my control for this. So show control. So you can see I got that there. I'm also going to click on my ghost now because I have that. I'm done with that for right now. And I'm going to turn off show control for this. So that way I don't get distracted. Okay. And then I don't know, 8 maybe. Here, I'll figure it out afterwards. We'll just get these keyframes slotted in. Okay, so let us go ahead and fix these up just like we did with our ghost. So let's grab our Paku peg layer properties, click the path editor, and then we'll just go in one at a time, grab the keyframe, set it to 1 tension, set the tension to 1, set the tension to 1, set the tension to 1. Whoops. Okay. Cool. And then let's look at these paths. They have pretty uniform spacing. It's this is a little slower than these ones, I can tell. So what I can do with that is I can just add exposure again with the plus key. 1, 2, 1, 2. Okay. And then maybe a little bit more here. 1, 2. Okay, 1, 2, 3. So now we got bless you. So yeah, and then we're not going to worry about the rotate on this. I know there's some people that are like, what is this? This guy's backwards. If you want to fix that, in fact, let me finish and then I'll go through and I'll show the like, what if? So we'll just keep going. I don't know, I'm going to guess 20-ish frames. So bring this bad boy over here. Again, you can see I need to add way more in-betweens. But then okay, so I'm actually gonna minus, there we go, 12. And then we'll go and so again, you're just doing your best with the timing, eyeballing it. That really slows down. Okay, So, and again, we'll go in and fix our... You can set a default tension value, by the way, but it sets it for everything ever. So, you would have to turn it off after this, is basically what I'm saying. Okay, so we'll just keep going though. Boom, 1, make sure that's set to 1, okay. This is 1, this is a 1, and this is a 1. Whoops. Alright, so if I zoom out here, and I'll even we'll do this. So, the main bulk is 2 moving at pace characters. They should have, there should not be weird acceleration going on. The key is to just have uniform looking acceleration. We're playing around with setting the keyframes and, using the add and remove exposure to space things out. So again, you don't need to worry about the direction that your PacMan faces for any of this. You don't need to have pellets. If you want to add a pellet to eat or whatever, to turn your ghost into the vulnerable ghost, feel free. I am asking you to simply work with the whole toggling between 2 things in the same peg. I want you to just have, as best you can, uniform looking acceleration for your ghost. And so then when you have 240 frames of animation for your ghosts and for your PacMan, and it looks good, that is the assignment. Then you are done. For those of you that are interested in some of the specifics about, making PacMan look correct, so like here, we're on this keyframe, right? Grab my rotate tool. So here, this guy should be doing this, right? He should be looking this way, so I'm going to F6 that. On this frame, though, our boy should be at a 90-degree angle. Right? Just like when we were doing the ball bounce in Maya. So then this guy will stay facing this way. And then you might be like, oh, then we just rotate him this way. No. Incorrect. Then you're going to rotate him back to normal. Here. Oh, you know what? You're going to do that on the frame after this. Because first you're going to keyframe him being this direction. This is, again, optional stuff. Optional stuff if you're still watching the video. So, and then here, though, on this frame, you definitely want facing the correct direction. And then also you want to, I think it's the scale. And then here, you would want to, again, keyframe on this frame, and then on this frame, flip it around. And then, again, we'll go back to rotate. Hold on, I gotta wait for my zoom tools. Then you'll rotate again. So we keyframe this here, F6, go to the next frame. Jaboy should be facing downward. Cool. Waka, 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 waka. Okay. Then, again, our boy facing here, then here. Get him back to normal. And then we also grab our scale and reverse it back to normal. And you can actually pop this open and see 'Cause these should be equivalent values. Oh, you know what? This is this should be 0.62. And then it goes back, and then you do the same thing there. So you just got to be mindful about the types of keyframes you're setting and when. Again, you don't need to make PacMan orient himself. Your PacMan can be walking backwards and stuff. We are merely trying to practice setting keyframes on pegs. That is the nuts and bolts of today. So you'll be done when you have both the peg for the PacMan with 240 frames of animation, making PacMan navigate this at a uniform pace. The same thing with the Ghost. You'll have them moving for 240 frames at a uniform pace. Also, you need to make sure at one point you switch between the exposure for the regular Ghost and switch to showing the vulnerable Ghost. All right, that's it.